Good evening, everybody. Warm welcome to all persons joining us today. A seminar on of the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory. Observatory is a project which is based at the Krakow University of Economics, but it's carried out in cooperation with the municipality of Krakow. Today's theme is understanding race and races in contemporary Poland. And we have a panel of great speakers who will tackle this theme. In the order, there are Tonia Ugwu, Bolaji Balogun, Margaret, Amaka, Ohia-Nowak, and James Omolo. My name is Konrad Pędziwiatr, and I'll be chairing this, moderating this meeting with the help of Jan Brzozowski, who will make sure that there is no background noise and that the communication is smooth. This seminar will be recorded and then will be made available through our YouTube channel. All persons except the speakers will be muted, and also their cameras, their video will be stopped, and this will be moderated by Jan. All participants of the seminar may use chat to ask questions anytime during the seminar. So during the presentations, you please do use chat and address these questions either to me or just to everyone. And then the participants will have the possibility to ask these questions and other questions personally during Q&A. Each speaker will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll pass to discussion. So these are the technicalities. As far as the theme of the seminar is concerned, I just thanked before we connected James Omolo for giving me inspiration to this seminar, but also a great thanks to Bolaji Balogun, with whom I've been working for some time, for also being the inspirational person behind this seminar, and also a person who has done a lot of work in terms of organizing and inviting so great speakers today. So big thanks. But obviously the theme was there, and our research, which Bolaji will share, has been carried out over the last years. But in a way, it was the events in US that have sort of pushed us to do this seminar at this particular time. The killing of George Floyd, an African American in the United States, triggered, as you know, protests across United States. And then gradually this protest spread also to Europe, to UK, France, Germany, Belgium, and other countries, where people march in solidarity with African Americans and called for questioning of their colonial past and removal of some of the statues celebrating such heritage. For example, statues of Leopold II. 2 days ago, Belgian King Philip expressed for the first time deepest regrets for crimes and abuses committed against Congolese people during the colonial period. What is interesting, the effect of George Floyd's death has also reached Poland, where people from Black communities have renewed their calls to reshape their perception of Black people in the country, as demonstrated in recent protests outside of the US Embassy in Warsaw, and also online discussion hashtag Don't Call Me Murzyn, which was followed by numerous persons online. In today's seminar, we'll examine the understanding of race and racism in Poland in the light of the latest thematic studies and in relation to these events. Some of the questions that we'll try to address are the following. How people of color are racialized in contemporary Poland, how difficult it is to be a person of color in Poland. Do people of color experience prejudice in Poland? How and in what context? And also, whether is the color of skin viewed as something attractive in Poland? If yes, in what context? Without further ado, I would like now to pass the floor to Tonia Ugwu, who is a Polish-Nigerian model from Gdańsk, so from the north of Poland. Tonia served as a face of many fashion and cosmetic products in different countries in Europe, including Poland. In addition to her modeling work, Tonia is a passionate activist currently working on Black Polish history, including Poland's African relationship. And I believe Tonia is going to share a little bit of her work with us. Tonia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say hi to everyone. I am really happy that I can talk to you about this important topic, because I think to understand current times when we live in, we have to know more about our history, like when it all started, how it all started. So I would like to start with my presentation. So I will share it with you in a second. Okay, I believe it is on.
It's
okay.
On,
yeah. Okay, so I will start with the first contact and the representation of Africa. I think for the Polish people, the first representation of Africa and the world outside Europe was the start of Christianity and the Holy Bible. But 15th century was the era of the great geographical discoveries, crusades, and missionaries. So Polish sailors were trading with the Ottoman Empire and through the Silk Road. So they were able to see more of that of the world outside Europe. And they were the people who were describing Africa in Poland. So they were describing, for example, African animals as beasts, fantastic basilisks, dragons, and unicorns. So how they describe the people, I think I can show you how. So here we have this little graphics from 16th century map of East Africa, when we can see this little man with no head, like they were describing Africans as something fantastic and crazy. Here is the better representation on the right side. And this is like the closest to the people. So now I will talk to you about this really interesting topic, like the Holy Lens of St. Maurice. I discovered recently that the spear is like the ceremonial weapon, considered the oldest insignia of power in Poland. And this was the clearly African weapon, because the St. Maurice was African. He was Egyptian, and he was started to be pictured as a black man in the early 12th century in Europe. So the first king of Poland, Bolesław Chrobry, was pictured with this spear as like the biggest and the most important symbol of of power in Poland. So this is like the first connection with Africa and Poland. Part 2, I will be talking about exotic fascinations and the ennoblement. Moors on Polish crests. I think really interesting is that in early 15th century, the black man was the symbol of something luxurious. So the big Polish families were using it on our crests. In Polish, it was named Murzynowa głowa. so the Moor's Head. It was used mostly in Mazovia and Pomerania. The black people in Poland in 16th and 17th century were not hard-working slaves like in Western Europe, so this was something different from this era, but they were luxurious companions and servants. King Stefan Batory has Africans on his court. Most royals had them. African servants were must-have accessories to every royal and nobleman. King Jan Sobieski III had great sympathy for his black butler, Józef Hollander, so the Dutchman. And here on this right side, we can see the black man as luxurious accessories in front of the king and his wife. The duties of African servants often were limited to serving the master and looking good, like holding a pipe when the master wanted to smoke it. And this was it. On the right side, we can see the painting with the African servant holding a parrot, like it was a symbol of something luxurious and prestige to have black men on your court or in your house. Sarmatian parades had to be exotic and luxurious, so Africans participating in them were wearing turbans and feather plumes, riding white horses, camels, or even elephants. On the left side, we have this famous painting of Canaletto, Election of Stanisław August. In this scene, we can see two black men. They are here, and now we can see the detail. I think really interesting case was the first black nobleman in Poland. Sadly, we don't know his name. He was known as Murzyn. Sarmatian nobleman Andrzej Fredro's companion was an African. He was living in Poland. He had a Polish wife. He was wearing Polish clothes, typical for Sarmatians. He was mentioned in Przemyśl town files from 1624, and he was known for his great sable skills. He was Fredro's best fighter and a good friend. So he wasn't a slave, but a nobleman. Alexander Denis, on another hand, we don't know how he looked, but he was the first documented African official. He was starost of the Koziegłowy city. Denis was appointed to be the starost by the Bishop of Krakow, at whose court Denis served. In 1633, he married a Polish woman and had 3 children. So this is the first documented Polish-African marriage. On the bottom, we can see the map of Koziegłowy and the crest of this city. Part 3, unexpected turn of events. Black Patriot, White Rebellion. Władysław Franciszek Jabłonowski was Polish and French general. We can see him on the left. He was born in Gdańsk, Poland, so my city. He was an illegitimate son of English Countess Marie Frances Delane and her African butler. Eventually, he was adopted by her husband, Konstanty Jabłonowski. During his education at École de Brienne military school in France, he met young Napoleon Bonaparte, but the two cadets didn't like each other. I think the Napoleon could be racist towards Jabłonowski. Jabłonowski, who recognized himself as a Pole, returned to Poland in order to take part in Kościuszko uprising and Dąbrowski legions. On 1802, he had been sent by Napoleon to Haiti in order to fight off the slave rebellion. But shortly after arrival, he was infected with yellow fever and passed away. Ironically, Polish soldiers joined the Haitian Revolution and took the side of the black slaves fighting off the French masters for the freedom. We can see it on the right side of the slide, on the famous painting Battle of Santo Domingo. During this time, there was familiar situation going on back in their homeland, as the Polish soldiers were fighting off their liberty from occupying forces of Russia, Prussia, and Austria that began in 1772. For their loyalty and support for overthrowing the French, the Poles acquired Haitian citizenship after Haiti gained its independence. Haiti's first head of state, Jean-Jacques Desalais, called Polish people the white Negroes of Europe, biali murzyni Europy, which was regarded a great honor and meant brotherhood between Poles and Haitians. Today, Polish Haitians are Haitian people of Polish ancestry, or a Pole with Haitian citizenship. We can see them on the photos bottom right. Casale, which is a small village in Haiti, is the main center of population of the Polish community in Haiti, called La Pologne, Poland. The name Casale, or the home of Zalewski, as many locals believe, originated from the popular Polish surname Zalewski and the Haitian Creole word from home, ka. So Casale is the home of Zalewski. Until this day, the children of the white rebels and white Negroes live in Casale, Haiti. War in Poland brings us the really interesting topic of black soldiers. We have them in our history. In the Greater Poland Uprising, Powstanie Wielkopolskie, there were two black soldiers known as Black Devils of 12th Intelligence Squadron of the 1st Air Regiment. Top left is a Cameroonian Sam Sandy, aka Iron Man. He was a boxer, wrestler, and a dandy. He had wife Lucia and two daughters, Gabrysia and Krystyna. He considered himself as a Pole. Bottom left, we can see Józef Dijak. He was a Sudanese. His surname was Jack. He was chauffeur and porter at European Hotel in Warsaw. He had a wife, Emma. On the right side, we can see the only black man who was fighting in the Warsaw Uprising, August Ogbola O'Brown. He was a Nigerian. He was working as a jazzman in Warsaw. He also had Polish wife and two sons, Richard and Alexander. In the spotlight. Now we can talk about pop culture. So how the Polish people were viewing Africans or black people in general. On the left, Polish People's Republic, so the communist era. It was really, it was a time when in Poland was really lots of African students. So even my father or his friends. So they were pictured as it in the popular mass media, such as Podróż za jeden uśmiech. We can see it on top left. It's the African student was playing Napa. We don't know the name of this actor, but he was pictured as a really funny guy, really bad speaking in Polish, but in real life, he was great speaking in Polish because he was living here for a few years. Bottom left, we can see American actress Duchil Martin Smith as Shirley Pawlak in Kochaj albo Rzuć, really popular Polish comedy. She was playing the daughter of the main character. In the 90s, we started to see Polish Africans, not the Afro-Americans or the students or else, but the mostly mixed children who grew up in Poland. So I think the first female actress, black actress, was Aleksandra Szwed, starring as Eliza in Rodzina Zastępcza in 1999. We can see her in the middle up photo. First black TV host was Omena Mensah in 2003. In early 2000s, first black man in the Poland who was winner of the big reality show was Eric Alira in 2002. It was the reality show Bar 2. Polish people love him. It was something new for them. to see an African living in Poland and describe himself also as a Polish man, and he gains really big sympathy and won. Also, this year we had the first Black football player, Emmanuel Olisadebe. His life wasn't really easy in Poland. He lots of times was talking about the racism towards him, even though he was a really good player. But the mostly every Pole could just recognize him. He was really famous, but still had really big problems with racism. Politicians and public figures. In Poland, we had 2 MPs in Polish parliament. In 2010, Nigerian John Abraham Godson was the first Black man to become a member of the parliament in Poland. In 2011, Dr. Kilian Munyama, Zambian, became an MP. Public figures that I want to speak about is my father, Larry Ugwu, and Mamadou Diouf, because they were doing a lot of projects that were showing Africa to Poland, to Polish people, and fighting racism in Poland. So in 2004, Larry was elected to be the director of the Baltic Sea Cultural Center. Before that, in 2002, he creates Pomeranian Association for Integration of Culture and Art, One World. In 2009, Mamadou Diouf, Senegalese, created Foundation Africa Another Way. In 2012 and 2015, he was a member of the Social Culture Council at the mayor of Warsaw. And the last topic is the present and the future. So right now in 2019-2020 is the historical moment when Black Polish people start to think about themselves as a bigger community, as a force to be reckoned with, as people who want to change something and decided about what we're living in. So last year, including me, we created this association of the Afro-Polish people. So this is first time in Polish history when something like that happening. On the right side of my slide, you can see the famous picture of the girl holding the sign, "Stop calling me Murzyn." I think what is great about this discussion about this word is that, first of all, we can see that this is the first time when Black females can speak about these topics, because mostly it was always men like Mamadou or my father or this all of these noblemen. But this year is the first year when the voice of Black Polish women is to be heard, and I am really interested in what way it will go, what shape it will become. So I have a good feeling that we can change something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tonia, for this inspirational talk and for for laying the larger historical framework of the presence of Black men in Polish history, and also for giving us a little bit of the update on the current situation. We'll have me and probably many others have questions to you, but we'll keep them for the Q&A.
Yeah.
And now I'd like to give the floor to Bolaji Balogun, who is a Nigerian citizen who received his PhD in sociology from the University of Leeds, and previously he held Leverhulme Trust Study Abroad Fellowship here at Krakow University of Economics. Now he will be starting to work at the University of Sheffield. His research focuses on Blackness and racialization in Central Eastern Europe, and his academic works have appeared in prestigious journals such as Ethnic and Racial Studies or the Sociological Review. Bolaji, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Konrad. First of all, I want to thank everybody for taking the time out to come and listen and watch this conversation. It's quite interesting also the way in which Tonia already set out the trajectory of Black people around Europe, also into Poland. I think that really, really helped me to try to bring everything up to date. What I'm about to present today is going to be really short and very, very brief. I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you. I hope you could see that. It's coming up now. I don't know if you can see that now.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So, so what I'm just about to present is just mainly the work I've been doing with Konrad, just really in relation to some of the data that were collected between 2018 and 2019. Within this data, we mainly collected a lot of discussion with people. We had a lot of interviews. We have focus group with people. But I'm just going to focus on only on the questionnaires. And within these questionnaires, I'm just going to be looking at only 4 questions that are actually related to people's experiences of differences in color in relation to people that are actually living in Poland. But before I go on to actually discuss this, let me quickly share with you the sort of the background information of the people that we spoke of, the people that actually completed this questionnaire. So the background information of these people, mainly these people, they're actually between the age of 18 and just over 40. We didn't get anyone who's probably in their 70s, but we got somebody over 40. We know also that most of these people, what's particularly interesting is, I wasn't expecting to actually get up to 92 female participants to actually complete the questionnaire. But even with that, we had 127 male, which is not too far, which sort of like gave us a good balance to actually work with in terms of experiences between male and female. Also, in terms of the country where these people have actually come from to live in Poland, it's quite interesting. Of course, all of them, they are from Sub-Saharan Africa. It's unique in this particular case is some of these people, they describe themselves as being Polish. Of course, some of them are actually born in Poland, some of them actually grew up in Poland, but at the same time, they cannot let loose the idea or the fact that they are also African. So there is, in fact, it was a particular problem in trying to identify, the coupleness of, Africanness and Polishness. So it was a bit of tussle for us to unpack. So also we know that most of these people that completed this questionnaire, they've been in Poland just between the period that spanned from a month up to over 40 years. And also we know that they have very good education. Some of them are actually out to actually go on to start their PhD, but majority of them, they have the bachelor's degree. And also in terms of, the kind of occupation, some are in education, most of them, they are within the health sector, and we have a very large number of people working in hotel and catering, few in financial services, and quite a few number also in entertainment. Now, I will just quickly present to you the survey. So this survey is going to be in 2 parts. So we've got 2 questions in one part and another 2 questions in the other part. So the first question that I looked at in terms of how these people are actually coping in Poland. So one of the questions we asked was that if people from sub-Saharan Africa experience prejudice and discrimination in Poland, is it because of, hey, so this is one of the things we try to experiment with, their migrant status. So we had 23 people say agree fully that yes, that's the case. We had 32% of these people saying just rather agree, and also we have 15% rather disagree, we have 8% fully disagree, and we have 22% of the people that completed the questionnaire saying, well, it's difficult for them to tell, which is quite interesting. I'm particularly attracted to this idea of difficult to tell, because it seems to me that these people are very open to what's actually going on with them, but they don't want to pin it down to a particular thing. But I just think that this 22%, they just wanted to get on with things. But we try to push the boundary a little bit further, and then we ask the next question, which is, now we ask them, discrimination and prejudice, is it based on their skin color? So people started coming out a lot more, and then we have 44% of these people saying, yes, fully agree that that's the case. We have 31% saying, well, they rather agree, and we have 6% rather disagree, and then we have 3% fully agreed, and then we have again 60% of this population, of this people that complete surveys say, well, it's again very difficult for them to say, which is quite a bit of number. I think what is particularly interesting in this part of this survey that I've just shared with you is it is very, very important that we try to look at it from a kind of global perspective. A work like this, or a survey like this, it's not the first time that it's actually been done. Some of the work that have been also even been done in Poland, I looked at a work done by Brzozowski in 1962. She almost pointed out almost the same thing that's really occurring in this survey that I've just shown you. What she actually identified as visible anthropological racial differences. It's quite interesting what she was trying to tell us here, that people usually judge individuals based on the way they appear. It's not known. In England, the late Michael Barton has actually done exactly a similar thing, and he argued that differentiation on the basis of outward appearance, the way people appearance, it brings some sort of judgment or a sort of attributes in which they are racialized, and put into a different category compared to a white person. In America, Perry and boarding housing did the same thing, and they found out that the Black people that took part in their own study, they were viewed as socially subordinate compared to the white counterpart. So this sort of like give us a kind of global, sense of what's actually going on. Another example I can give to you is Keith and Harry in 1991. They did the same thing in America, and they concluded that skin color bias is still affecting most people in the United States today. So it seems to me that this issue that we're looking at, or what I've just shared with you, is not only Polish-centric. It's more of a global thing, and it's more broader than what we're actually looking at in Poland. The second part of the survey, we look at attractiveness, which is quite interesting. I'm really like rooting for this part of the conversation. So we asked people, is your skin color seen as something attractive? And it's quite remarkable. 36% of those people came back and say, certainly yes, their skin color is actually being attractive. Right? In terms of that attractiveness, well, to be attracted to something, sometimes it might come out as negative, it might be positive. But these people are certain that, well, it's definitely attractive. And also we've seen from what Tonia has actually just shown us, there is a sense of attractiveness in terms of somebody being different, or in terms of a Black person. And so we had also 27% also rather agree. And then we have 5% of those people rather not agree, And we have 3% certainly not agree. Again, we have 29% that I find very difficult to say. So it's quite interesting the way people actually look at the way attractiveness actually work. What is particularly of great interest to me is if we ask somebody or people outside Poland, the result probably would have been different, because people will often look at Poland as a kind of homogeneous society full of white people. Therefore, there cannot be any sense of attraction going on in there, or attractiveness going on in there. But with the people that have actually lived the experience actually in Poland, the outcome is actually looking completely different. So we try to push the boundary a little bit further, and we ask this question: how often is your skin color seen as something attractive? This is quite interesting, and I'm so surprised that people, actually 40% of the people that complete the survey said, well, every day. It's quite interesting, to say that you get attraction to things every day. And then we also had 8% of the people saying once a week. We have 7% saying once a month. We have 35% saying occasionally, which is quite a lot as well. And then we have 10% saying never. So, which is quite interesting. Again, I want us to think around this, last two surveys in a kind of global sense as part of the global discourse. Again, it's a work that has been done in America. For example, Neil and Wilson found exactly the same effect of attractiveness when they are talking about beauty and success in America, especially within the African American women, in which the lightness of their skin, they are seen as something attractive, or the texture of their hair or the shape of their body, they are seen as something attractive. So there is a way in which there's a lot of attraction going on there in terms of color. Also in the UK, we have somebody like Michael Lewis with a very, very interesting experiment, showing to us that mixed race population, they are often on average being perceived as more attractive than the rest of the population. So there's quite a lot to think around, in relation to attractiveness, in Poland and also in a global context. The very little conclusion that could, or we generally will, skin color is important in the life of people of color. It sometimes can decide the kind of chances that they're gonna get and the kind of chances that they're not gonna get. And it will be quite interesting to hear what people actually have to say about it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Bolaji, for sharing bits of our research. And one of the questions we'll have to other panelists is probably a question: what do you think about the results, and what could be the key variables that would be that are important to take into account while thinking about the elements of microaggressions or the elements of attractiveness. Let's keep these questions for another questions that appear in the chat for a bit later. Thank you very much for posing the questions. This is to all participants who have already asked questions. You may ask these questions anytime during the seminar, and we'll give the possibility for you to ask these questions personally during Q&A, or I will ask these questions to our distinguished panelists. Now I'd like to move to Margaret, Amaka Ohia-Nowak, who is a Polish-Nigerian linguist, critical discourse analyst, and anti-racist educator. She facilitates cross-cultural communication trainings and anti-discrimination workshops across different age groups in Poland. She received her doctoral degree in racism in the Polish language from the University of Wrocław, and she was also a Fulbright scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, and a visiting scholar at the Center for Race and Ethnicity and Migration in London. She authored and co-authored lessons, scenarios, educational material, and scientific publications on anti-Black racism, racist language, and discursive representations of people of African descent in the Polish media. She collaborates with various academic and non-academic organizations across Poland. Margaret, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Konrad, for this kind invitation. I'm really glad to be here and to see so many participants joining, attending, asking questions. Thanks very much for putting up this panel. It's a really honor to be here also among all these distinguished speakers. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about my research a little bit today, and hopefully will fit in the timeline. And I'll share the presentation now. Okay. So first I want to talk about a little bit about my position as a researcher, as a scholar, as an activist. As Konrad has just said, I'm a daughter of a Polish woman. I'm Polish-Nigerian. I'm a daughter of a Polish woman and a Nigerian man. I was born and raised in Poland with a few years living in Nigeria in my early childhood. And as a Polish-Nigerian woman, as you can expect, I have experienced prejudice and racist discourse on my own skin. And therefore, I position myself as a Black and white, mixed race, critical scholar who is impacted by the discourse and is living in a predominantly white society and whose study is a self-reflexive response to this racially distinct context. So as a critical discourse analyst, I'm mainly interested in language use, in power abuse, and in the way in which language is reproduced through power and through discourse in the society, and how this reproduces power. So in my work, I may make references to my personal experiences, to incidents of intentionally or unintentionally excluding comments. And sorry, I'm going to show the presentation a little differently. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's it. So, so I've experienced incidents of intentionally or unintentionally referring to my skin color, whether it was referring to the attractiveness of my skin color or questions directed at me in everyday conversations. And I see them as microaggressions, or as many other scholars, psychologists see them as well. So for example, questions like, where are you really from? Where are your parents from? What's your origins? And you know, this digging in. So I think that people of color in Poland know what I mean. So on the very surface layer, it's quite an innocent question, but in fact it's a very polarizing comment or question that implies that I'm not really from Poland, right? That you're not really from our group, from the in-group, so-called, right? So you probably don't speak Polish well, because I got comments like, you speak Polish so well very often that I've just seen it as a form of a microaggression, which is unintentional and very often unconscious as well. But I also look at blatant acts of racism in my research, which were directed at my person and are routinely directed at people of color in Poland, in this country. I don't want to say that racism is an individual thing. So Bolaji was saying about prejudice as an individual attitude towards a person who looks differently, right? I'm going to speak about racism. So everyday racism, microaggressions, they all come together and they form this kind of systemic racism. So this racism that cannot be reduced to the personal emotions or hatred or contempt or of someone, or it should not be reduced to merely individual acts of violence, but it's rather a systemic group process that involved power relations, power structures between us and them. So it's division, this polarization between the dominant group and the dominated group, and the reproduction of power in the society. This is what interests me, and this is what is reproduced through public discourse as well, and through media discourse as well. So what I would like to talk about in this in these 10 minutes maybe is to briefly explain the framework I'm using of how race is produced and reproduced in the Polish society through language, through text, through talk, and particularly through media discourse. And so how do I define power? I define power in terms of control. So if you can control something, you can, or someone, especially if you have power over certain groups, you can control the way they behave. That you can control what they can do, what they cannot do. So you basically can limit their freedom, right? So people can no longer enter your country. They can no longer enter your neighborhoods. If you have power over them, they can no longer enter your family, or let alone hold top managing positions in your workplace. They can no longer enter your Facebook group, and so on and so on. So all these divisions between us and them are the basis of the systemic racism. So people who are who cannot enter your space, your place, can also easily become a target of, for instance, police brutality, or they may be denied decent jobs and have no employment opportunities, right? So this is the level of racism I'm talking about. I'm not saying there is no racial harassment on an everyday level, but I'm saying that racism is something that exists on the systemic level. And this is very crucial, especially when we talk about language and discourse and public discourse, but also everyday conversations. Poland. No explicit history of colonialism in Africa, general lack of daily interactions with people of African descent. And believe me that people that live in large cities have completely different experience. Black people, white people, multicultural people, or different kinds of ethnicities. But smaller cities, I live in Lublin, which is one of the biggest cities, but still it's not the larger city. And the countryside is completely different. So despite of all these, so no colonies, no post-colonial migration to Poland, and lack of daily interactions and exposure of people of African descent among the great majority of Polish people, still the racial colonial prejudice exists, right? So this colonial framework is very deeply rooted in everyday language practices. And I'm going to speak about it in a bit. So Polish speakers very often are unaware of the racially charged content of their speech, especially in colloquial Polish, where the habit of associating Black people with specific characteristics, including physical, social, cultural, emotional, and so on, and intellectual, is not always explicitly articulated, but is based on the deeply rooted polarization, as I said before, between us and them, between Poles and foreigners. So we Poles are good, decent, modern, civilized, and the other non-Poles are bad, lazy, uneducated, unreliable, and so on and so forth. So examples of how Black people are portrayed in the Polish language can be found in a range of discourses, but today I want to focus mainly on media discourse, but beginning a little bit with educational discourse. So the first dimension, the first level of discourse, I'm going to be talking about 3 today, is the discursive discrimination. So what do we see in Polish language, in Polish discourse, referring to Black people? And so the first example I'm showing right now on the slide is the Nobel Prize winner by Henryk Sienkiewicz in Desert and Wilderness, a very popular youth novel representing a colonial worldview where white people are superior as opposed to inferior Black Africans. I'm going to be very short and brief, and perhaps for a lot of you simplifying the issues, but I just want to show as many representations, as many examples as I can. So the next one also from early 20th century, but which is still as much as in desert and wilderness functioning in contemporary discourse in Poland, in education, contemporary education, is Murzynek Bambo. It's a children's rhyme where a black boy, the protagonist of the poem, is presented as inferior to the presumably white reader. And even though the novel and the children's rhyme, Murzynek Bambo, come from early 20th century, the colonial semantics, the framework they convey, are present in many examples of contemporary public discourse today. And one of the examples, which already was mentioned by Tonia today, is the M word. So the M word, which is mainly used now in everyday speech, and this is a word that actively reproduces stereotypes. So for example, you can find in everyday language with the word murzyn, metaphors for the exploited laborer, inferiority, or referring to dirtiness of the black skin color. But these are, as I said, this is the surface of this word. So I'm not going to speak about etymology. I've seen somebody asked about it, also about the gender bias of this, right? The gender unspecificity, because it's murzyn and not murzynka, which is also very important. It also tells us how Black people, through this word, are represented in our minds, right? Because it's important to remember that discourse as always something that is coming from the social cognition. So the shared attitudes, something, the mental models, all the conceptualizations that lay in our head, in our brain system, and also stereotypes also are, right, mechanism of the brain mechanism also. But this word, as you can see and read the translations of the proverbs, idioms, expressions, colloquial expressions, it cloaks prejudice as well. So this discourse just creates a particular image of a Black person. And idioms referring to, as I said, to dirt and to unwashability of the Black skin color. So the recent debate about the word murzyn has been lasting now for over a decade or even more, I would assume, going back to Mama Abdou Dief, Tonia Ugwu, and many other Africans that had been living here for many years in Poland. But what's interesting in this contemporary debate, especially in the last few weeks after the murder of George Floyd and the protests after his murder and related to Black Lives Matter, is that is seen increasingly as controversial, and it continues. But still, it continues to serve as a generally accepted neutral description for Black people. At the same time, the term tends to be rejected by the majority of Polish Black communities and African Polish communities and mixed race community and so on and so forth, African communities, people of color, and a growing number of white Polish linguists also argue against the word's assumed neutrality. This is changing. This is what also Tonia mentioned. This is kind of right now a very significant moment in the history as well. Let's see what the future brings, right? But I just want to say how much this word and the semantics of this word is prevalent in the everyday discourse, in public discourse as well. Here you can see a Facebook post by a vice mayor of Gdynia, one of the biggest cities in Poland, where he says, I did it on purpose. I put here Black children, but he uses the adjective murzyńskie. which could be translated as Negro children or Moor children, right? This is problematic. I don't want to go into it tonight, but Black children are born white. They only become colored bathing in such water daily. So you can see the semantic, this thinking, even if it's ironic as he was explaining afterwards, right? It's still this colonial thinking, what Stuart Hall was also writing about, representation of Black skin as dirty. It needs soap to be washed well and to become white. Another example, and this was from 2019, another example a few years back, before, it was from 2009 actually, so a decade back. It was by a Polish priest saying to a Black priest, actually about a Black priest, look, Murzyn, he hasn't completely washed. So we can see that this kind of thinking, this colonial derogatory thinking about Africans and Black people is still present in Poland, even though those words and those rhyme and this novel and all the history is quite, it was quite long ago. Another powerful tool of derogating people through discourse is through the use of metaphor. And metaphors linguistically are very powerful, because if you want to grab somebody's attention, the reader's or a viewer's attention, you emphasize this emotional impact by metaphors by themselves. So the modern metaphor and synecdoche, especially in the theory of George Lakoff, for those of you who are linguists or know, you know that they emphasize the embodied nature, right? So the modern theory emphasizes the embodied nature of metaphors. So it is like as you feel it with your whole body, you can engage in it, you can participate, and it's usually used to translate an abstract concept. Like, for instance, immigration. Here, specifically immigration from Africa, from white Africa. You can also see visual representations, also very important. Today, I'm just going to focus on lexical items, on the word use and the ways in which, and some rhetorical strategies. And so when you see there is a wave of immigrants, or there is an invasion of Africa, as you can see on the right-hand side, the invasion of Black continents, right? So the 40% of Africans want to emigrate. So you already envision this invasion as if like a foreign army coming, even though it's just maybe a few people. This picture is not representative at all. I mean, it is for media because they want to catch the attention. But this is very powerful. So using numbers, using metaphors and other rhetorical strategies, no time to talk about today, very, very powerful, very much impacting, influencing the mind of people, and then, of course, influencing the actions. So the last discursive strategy is the use of words. So I said I'm focusing today on lexical items, on some phrases, representing Black Lives Matter protests in Poland, in Polish media, in the US, and across the world. Using the words to refer to people, to props they're using, frameworks, not really mentioning that this struggle, this battle is for the justice, against racism, which had lasted for many, many years, against the oppression, but focusing on these negative situations, on negative stereotypes, and using these rhetorics for ages. But you know, in Poland, it's pretty a new situation. I'm aware that in the UK, in the US, it's been there, and analysis had been done. So, so there's been use of flares, rocks, bottles. People are called terrorists, angry mob aggressors, and I'm not saying there aren't any. I'm just saying what media are doing to make it sensational, to portray, to depict it as stereotypical, as inaccurate, as one-sided, argumented, right? So this kind of lexical items, riots, looting, chaos, and the framework, disorder of status quo, and so on and so forth. forth. So these discourses produce specific general stereotypes in the brain. They produce general negative picture of the others, which are precisely the basis of discriminatory actions afterwards, like violence, killings, forms of discrimination, microaggressions, everyday aggressions, which are based on shared attitudes and values, which we construe very slowly since birth almost through these forms of public discourse, especially when there is lack of interaction with people that are represented, or very little interaction, right? So there is this imaginary other there, which we can imagine, and then we know everything about him, quote unquote. So the second level, and I'm going to be quick with the two of them, is discourse perspective. So who can talk in public debate? Who is cited? What are the sources? How are the events and issues related to people of color produced and reproduced in Poland? So who is usually cited? For instance, in this debate about the word Murzyn, right? It's usually white Polish academics, professionals, whatever, police, maybe not in this case, but police officers in other cases. I'm not going to mention them today, but there are a few, quite a few of them that can serve as an example. So usually when Black perspective is cited, or Black people are cited and their voices are brought up, it's seen as less reliable or biased or not objective, especially when informing about racism or some derogatory racial words or acts of racial abuse. So this means that they are just silenced, and Black people's perspective is not highlighted. So this, as I said, this happened also in this heated debate about the M word. So guess who was cited by the majority of media or social media users or all the commenters, instead of it being Black people who experience this word, right, who are addressees, linguistically speaking, of this word. This was the white perspective. So an outdated Polish dictionary, even the contemporary Polish dictionary already has a note that it's been derogatory, the use of it has been derogatory. So there is this note, but nobody mentioned this. Everyone cites this is just a symbol. It's not exactly Linde's dictionary, but some dictionaries that had been written before 2018, when the latest, the most up-to-date dictionary has been edited and published. So the last level, also related to the perspective, is the discourse of denial, racist denial, also persistent in many other Western European countries, right, or the US, but also in Poland, in a very specific context as well, of course, regarding the political situation and the social situation. But among the there is this usual mechanism that when you emphasize the negative traits of others, this usually comes along with de-emphasizing, excusing, mitigating our bad things. So usually discrimination, prejudice, or violence or racism are not major topics in media. So it's rather speaking about their ridiculous resentment or their rage or indignation, right? Just like here, wave of indignation after the posting the Facebook post by the vice mayor of Gdynia. So it was a wave of indignation. So it's like it's their fault. So this is the main response to racist discourse. We will not admit it was racist. We will say that they were complaining, they were resentful, and so on and so forth. So, okay, cutting this short, I'm just going to show a few examples from colloquial social media utterances and comments that also portray this racism, the denial of races, denying racism, right? So because of this very basic and simplified definition of races, that racism is hatred, that racism is just this on this individual level, oh, it's not so bad for you, right? So when I speak about white privilege during my trainings with white people in Poland, I very often get this response that, okay, many white people are underprivileged and they also experience discrimination. I never say they didn't, but this is just, you see, this sort of denial. I don't want to see the problem, so I'm kind of changing the trajectory and I'm changing the direction. I'm gonna now speak about myself and not listen to what other people who experience discrimination want to say. Two last things. Denial. I'm not a racist because I have Black friends, very typical as well. Or like here, I love Morgan Freeman, etc. And I'm not racist, but I don't understand the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So this is so-called an apparent denial, right? So I'm not racist, but I don't really understand what you mean because I'm colorblind and so on and so forth. I don't want to see this. I see your struggle as a threat to my privilege, as if somebody was taking away something from me when you are demanding just to have your human rights accepted and not violated, right? So, okay, where do we go from here? I need to stop now. Tonia mentioned already some initiatives made, initiatives by Africans. I'm sure James probably will mention also by Polish Africans, African Polish, and so on and so forth. I'm just gonna give a shout out to some Polish organizations, to some Polish NGOs, but also American Studies Center, University of Warsaw. So it's a public institution, Polish Humanitarian Action, Never Again Association. There are organizations that care, and critical education here in the middle. So there are organizations that care, that want to bring change in this particular area of racism, of helping out people of color. Maybe not helping out, this is patronizing. I don't like helping out. Supporting and taking action, right? Becoming an anti-racist. So, so I see this from my side, so what can we do about it? Because very often I get these comments, okay, you're being critical, you're just doing the critical analysis, but what's next? So I'm also providing, as Konrad said, trainings, etc. And I really believe that through a better education, systematically influencing people, especially children and youth, but also citizens, journalists, politicians, if they can be educated. I'm not sure, but maybe. I believe it would really lead us somewhere. And the explanation is very simple, because if nobody spontaneously is born as a racist, it's learned through public discourse, through socialization, through early education. It can be also unlearned, right? So racism can be unlearned, but it's not the end. So when we unlearn racism, also as Jane Elliott says, she says that we can unlearn racism and then relearn an anti-racist framework, and we can become anti-racist. But this, of course, requires work. This requires engaging in talks and discussions, and this also requires listening to Black voices to understand and not only to respond. Thank you very much. These are the references.
Big thanks, Margaret, to this inspiring presentation and raising so many important questions. Some of the slides that you showed and some of the questions that you raised have heated a debate on the chat around Murzynek Bambo. We are going to probably come back to this during Q&A, but obviously I believe some of the questions and some of the problems you've raised are going much further, and I would like us to go much further in this discussion today about understanding race and racism than just focusing on this particular poem. And one of the key question, I believe, and one of the key problems that you raised is this situation of challenging at the moment the assumed neutrality of the M word and how it happens and this important emergence in a way of the Black female mixed race agency with the YouTube post. We could probably have a separate a seminar just on the dynamics of this particular hashtag and the YouTube discussion. But let's keep this question, this problem, and many others that you've raised for Q&A. So and now just move quickly to James. James Omolo is Kenyan, living in Poland. He's a founder of Africa Connect Foundation, an advocacy organization on human rights issues affecting people of African descent. James is a passionate activist and UN fellow in 2019, and author of 2 books on race and racism in Poland, Strangers at the Gate, Black Poland, and Crossing the Color Line, Interracial Marriage and Biracial Identity, and Chinese Foreign Policy in Sudan and Poland and Africa, Past, Present and Future on African Foreign Relations. James has lectured at the University of Social and Sciences and Humanities, as UPS in Warsaw, Center for Postgraduate Studies and Training on Africa Business and Beyond. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Konrad, and a shout out to all the participants that are available. My presentation actually is going to be really very short. I'm not going to use the slides, so I'll just be talking. The title of my presentation is based on my Blackness, which later I will talk about some dimensions of racism in Poland. So as a Black man, race has been an integral part of my life since I landed in this country. I have always been granted a bill of curiosity and unwarranted treatment. The purveyors of white supremacy are spreading their messages of fear and hatred. They repudiate us, Black people, with goatees and racist rhetoric. It's the derogative comments about my physical attributes, about being an African, about my perceived affiliation to primates that often invites unwarranted monkey chants as I walk on the street. My Blackness becomes a barometer for my performance, and it becomes surreal that I have to be an ambassador of the entire African continent. My Blackness does not protect me from the security guards, the Horona, if you like, who will follow me in the stores as I shop, suspecting me of stealing merchandise. I always wear a badge of a suspect citizen. The notion that Black people are genetically predisposed to be thieves feels like, going through hell, being treated like an animal, like a criminal, rather. My Blackness does not shield me from being stopped by the police or scrutinized at the airport in the pretense of random checks. It does not protect me from working many years and not getting a promotion, or sometimes getting less than my fellow white employees with less qualifications. As I consider commuting to work or school, or for any other reason, my mind becomes fraught with anxiety, frustration, and anger sometimes at being targeted by those who think it's their job to investigate further by asking, at times, injudicious and impertinent questions and checking travel or personal identity documents. These include the police, the security guards, and immigration officials at borders, as well as airline staff who presume they must act as auxiliary border controls and target specific people or a group of people. As a Black man, I have to bear the burden of having to be twice as good to get half as far. And my heart sings sometimes that I'm going to wear that for the rest of my life if I don't change the conditions of place. The constant echoing voices of go back to Africa becomes a constant reminder that I don't belong here, that forever I will be a stranger in a country I have embraced so much as my second home. And when I had my 2 children, I got this nagging curiosity of the uncertainty they're going to face in a prejudiced monoracial society, having in mind that they're already categorized as Black, even though they're mixed. They're just as white as they're Black. It is indeed a rough road sometimes, being a Black person in Poland. The road is always bumpy. One day I said to myself that, that moment I will feel relief from the manifestations of racism. That is the time I will make a hell of a noise in jubilation. Unfortunately, that moment never arrived. So I put more effort and more of my time to write and address these issues, to create awareness on the reality that we face as Black people. So just to wrap it up, the various manifestations of racism and discrimination, both at institutional and societal level in Poland, actually are manifold and affect virtually every aspect of life of people of African descent. Equal access to employment, racial abuse, violence in public places like on buses, on trams, restrictions on movements by overzealous policing, and experiences of hate crimes are regular occurrences. So specific phenomena such as institutional discrimination are compounded further by profiling, particularly by law enforcement and state security officials. Political discourse and narrative openly embrace and express hate speech and propagate negative, prejudicial, and stereotypical information. And we can recall, I think it was early this year when the President Duda, publicly making a joke about Africans being cannibals. So the aforementioned intolerant discourse actually is facilitated by the use of social media, as Margaret articulated, across all sectors of the society, contributing to the spread of xenophobic and racist sentiments among the public, and in some cases, they've encouraged violence by racist individuals and groups. And finally, we have to understand that people of African descent, or rather Black people, is not a monolithic group. They suffer from multiple, aggravated, or intersecting forms of discrimination based on other related grounds, such as age, sex, language, religion, origin, disability, among others. So there's a lot to be done, but I think what we need to do basically is to fight this, pandemic of racism together. That this perception that only Black people should be fighting it. We need both sides actually to fight it, considering the history of Poland. They should actually understand more of how subjugation works, how inferiority works, because they've been and they're still part of that conundrum. So I leave at that point, and let's move to further discussion and question and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James, for some very important insights on and answers to these questions of what it means to be a Black person in Poland in various contexts. I'd like now to open the floor for discussion. There are plenty of very important questions asked by participants of today's seminar. Still over 60 people who are with us, and many important questions asked in the chat. I have my own questions to each of the panelists. The panelists can, or the speakers can also have questions to themselves. So feel free to ask questions, to take the opportunity as well as you answer, to raise questions to each other if you wish so. And there are two ways of doing it. You can either read these questions in the chat, or we can give also the possibility to those persons that ask these questions to ask them personally, because sometimes they may ask these questions in a different way to elaborate more. Justina was one of the participants who asked very early a question, so I would like to give the opportunity for Justyna Wierzchosławska to ask questions if she wishes to do so, to start her video and unmute herself and to ask these questions. Karol Kaczorowski had a few questions, so I'd like to give the chance to Karol to ask these questions also personally through Zoom. Ursula L, maybe Legavitz, I'm not sure, who had also some important questions. So please reveal yourself if you wish so. Pani Professor Dorota Praszałowicz had also a question. So just please emerge, or if you don't want to, just say that you prefer not to ask question personally, and then I'll ask the speakers to basically read these questions personally and try to address them, or I can do this as well. So we have Justyna to ask question. So it's very early in the chat. Question concerned, I believe, issue of the M word. Yeah, I'll just yeah, okay, let's start from Professor Dorota Praszałowicz. A question to Tonia: have you experienced racism within your Polish family? Could you elaborate on this issue, Tonia?
Within my own family, no, never. So I don't know what to tell you, because I recognize that my grandmother told me that when my mother met my dad, who is Nigerian, my grandfather was slightly prejudiced, like, I'm not sure if black man is good for my daughter. But when he met him in person, like in 1 second, he just loved him, he laughed with him, eat his African food. So like, I think my family is really open, and this was never an issue for me. So that's my answer.
Margaret, would you like to answer some of the questions that were asked to you in the chat?
Certainly, yes. Which one? Which one should I read, Konrad?
Yeah, the chat is pretty large. That's
okay.
why. Yeah, a question by Ursula, for example. It was a question to Margaret. I'm wondering about this colonial narration in Muźnik Babo. Can you give us some particular examples? I can't see this rhyme from this perspective. I even It even finishes with the words szkoda, że Bambo czarny wesoły nie chodzi razem z nami do szkoły, which I read as a kind of welcoming rather than prejudiced or excluding. It's generally a lot of discussion, as you could see on chat, was about this particular rhyme, and you have given us as one of this narrative examples how the racial, prejudicial, or biased sort of perspective on Africa is being, in a way, live its own life after many decades. So if you could address that.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Ursula, for this question, and thank you for addressing this issue of the colonial narrative here. But also, in general, thanks very much for all the comments that follow this question by Ursula, and sort of partly give some answers, perhaps, because as I said, I didn't have much time to elaborate on this, and I will try to keep it short and give just my perspective. So, so you're asking about the semantics, the meaning, the colonial meaning that are embedded in this rhyme. One of you, I think it was Jan Brzozowski, already said that there is this line about Murzynek, the boy going to have a bath, and then he's afraid of becoming white, of whitening his skin. So this is a very colonial kind of meaning, already analyzed, described also in literature, that the black skin is dirty. This already makes it colonial, because this was a kind of thinking in the colonial ages, that black skin presupposes physical dirt, but it also presupposes mental dirt and mental darkness as well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not implying that Julian Tuwim, the author of the rhyme, was intentionally putting colonial meanings into it, because I said at the beginning also of my presentation that most meanings and most representations that we carry are unintentional. So because we live by them, we are surrounded by them, and so was Julian Tuwim, whose intention was very most likely not derogatory or discriminatory. His intention was just to bring this unknown word to African word to Polish children. So that's why it ends with this line: "It's a pity, it's too bad that a black bambo boy is." The black and joyous bambo boy does not attend school with us. There's the same school, right? So in these times, in the 30th of 20th century, it didn't have this pragmatic meaning as it has right now. So when I say pragmatic meaning or contextual meaning, I'm saying that the contextual landscape of Poland had changed dramatically since the 35, right? So throughout the decades since 1935, the context in Poland has changed, and so has the population context changed as well. So for me and for many of my African friends who attended school in the 90s, in early 90s, in late 90s, in late 80s as well, they were immediately called Bambo, Murzynek Bambo, by their colleagues and by other pupils in the classroom, because this was the only reference they had from this poem. And this is something that is very dangerous, and this is something that we don't want to have, the othering of a child, right? So children, they have this very strong need of belonging. And this was the way this rhyme was intruding this sense of belonging, right? By being called and by being stigmatized as someone who is from Africa, who is not us. And for kids, for children who were born in Poland, this was a very harmful and hurtful experience, to hear that they were this bambo who is jumping on trees. I saw someone also mentioning the experience. They were also called Denis, I guess. They were also called, oh, so you don't jump on trees, you are not in Africa, you are not reading books, Murzyńs, like Negro books or black children books, you are with us. So it's this polarizing, again, which I was kind of trying to bring to your attention to, that this is about this polarizing and the othering of people. So those who are other, they are seen not only as different, as exotic, but they are also seen as someone who does not belong to our group, which can be, for children, this can be really, really hurtful. And as I said, the population landscape, even though the Black population in Poland is still very little compared to other for instance, Western European countries, is still, this is a very, now this is very a powerful tool of othering, which children just use unconsciously as well. And same as many rhymes in the more multicultural societies, somebody mentions Sambo as well, the UK one. This reminds me of bamboo very much, and it was banned decades ago, right? So nobody asked why this should be removed, at least from the curriculum, or just maybe read with some critical eye, and not only just this literal kind of thinking. Yeah, okay, that's it. I hope I answered this question. And if you need more, or maybe somebody from the speakers want to, thanks.
There is also this element of question. You may lead this a little bit later from Justina at the very early, about the gender aspect and sexism in the word, in the M word. But we can keep it also for later. And I would like to also have James sort of perspective on this, on the larger dynamics around this discussion, let's say public discussion that is happening now in Poland, and this that is challenging the neutrality of this word. How do you view this this dynamic, and how do you see it? But before, there was also a question to Bolaji on the gender aspect of the attractiveness in the results. Would you like to reflect on this, Bolaji?
Yes, very well. That survey that I've just presented is still emerging. We're still looking at the early findings of what we've actually what we found. We did not, at the minute, we've not actually looked at the gender aspect of anything, or whether a male person is most likely to experience anything good or anything bad, or compared to female. But what we notice is, in terms of the skin color, there's a tendency that the lighter the skin color is, the lesser the discrimination, in a sense. So the deeper it is, the closer it is to Africa, the heavier the discrimination. So in terms of gender, it's not, at the minute, not fully emerging what they're actually telling us. If I have to bring in other data into it, so in terms of, say, for example, the interviews that people have spoke to, yes, you can see that there is a sense in which gender play a role. So for example, women are most likely to look kind upon, in a way, compared to a big male, masculine, black man. There's kind of conception about, most especially the black men. An example of what we've seen in the death of George Floyd in America. They're most likely, the outcome of George Floyd's death might have been different if you had been a woman. So there is a sense in which, the treatment might be different in terms of gender, But in this survey, we've not actually seen that at the minute.
Thank you very much, Balaji. James, would you like to answer questions that are raised earlier or any other question that is there in the chat?
Yeah. I'd like to just briefly tackle this, your last question on Mujin. And actually, I'm so surprised that we still talk about it up to this moment, mostly Polish people, because I think we've had so many discussions on this topic. Even the discourse led to the ban of Mujin bamboo in school curriculum. And there's been a lot of, discussion even at the time when one of the MPs called John Godson Mujin in Parliament. And look at this way, if you are talking with your friend or somebody else, Polish people always use the titles, Pani Doctor, Pan, Pana, wherever. But in the African case, always Mujin in most cases. And words do not bear any meaning without the context. And the context in which Mujin is used in the public discourse is very distinct. So if you want to subjugate an African, then just replace an African with Mujin. And we could see it again, actually, I think it was 2014, rather, or 2015, during the tape scandal in Warsaw, when the former Foreign Affairs Minister, Sikorski, was caught on tape, saying, when he was referring to American Polish foreign policy, and he said categorically, said that Polish people have the mentality of Mujinov. And he went further to talk about they have low self-esteem, they are shallow-minded. So just that part projects exactly the context in which Mujin is being used. And so nowadays we concentrate or we put more emphasis on semantics rather than the pragmatics. And I think we cannot move forward if we tend to justify the terminologies based on, on some semantics that were coined by some racist individuals, actually. So I think we need to move beyond that, understand the context in which this word is used. So why can't you just call somebody who's, a black person, an African or black person, rather than, give a tag, which is very demeaning in a way. So I think we need to move beyond this this justification of, Mujin is used to replace black, which of course is not the reality. Yeah, so that's basically my point.
Mm-hmm. So you basically, your point is that that it's surprising that we're still there, but at the same time, isn't it something positive that this dynamic is there and that there are these new voices very strongly emphasizing, I mean especially these various persons of mixed race who have stood up so strongly nowadays and said that yes, we should stop it, because at the end of the day, it still carries on, as Margaret has shown, at various levels, from the top politicians to religious leaders who supposedly jokingly say all of these things and make these stupid mistakes. And don't consider them mistakes. Don't you think that this is a positive sort of development that is happening now?
Yeah, of course it is. And don't get me wrong. It's essentially should be part of the discussion. But year in, year out, we talk about these issues, and it always erupts after some incidents. Like nobody was talking about it before the George Floyd case, And after George Floyd's case, people forget about that and then they start talking about it again. But it's our responsibility as well, as Black people, people of African descent, to actually show them how we feel by being tagged, how this word affects us. It's not the person who is talking, it's the subject. So you may justify in any other way that, I don't mean it. It's out of, it's just been taken out of the context, but how do the subject feel about the word? So people should respect that boundary as well. And I think, I was checking the chat actually, there are also some derogatory words about Polish people that they would not like to be called, like the Białas or I don't remember some of them. So just people need to understand. And this is the thing that sometimes we get really tired. We get really tired about educating people all the time while they should educate themselves. Everything's always on our side that we have to educate them, but they don't educate themselves. And I think we have to move forward if they cannot educate themselves. And I think Margaret articulated on that. They need to unlearn and then relearn. But the focus on miseducation, actually. So we have to go beyond that. And, this is the space, this kind of a platform that gives us that voice. And then what's the next step? So next year, in 2 years or 3 years, we should be talking about the validity of its application. We should be talking about Mujin even in 10 years. And it's exhausting. It means actually we are stagnant in our position. We're not moving forward.
In a way,
so of course, the discussion is positive. It's important to have it, but on the other hand, we need to progress actually. Yeah.
But also using new ways of new channels to push this forward in a way, and here social media is probably one of the important places to do so. I'll give you want to add something to this, Bolaji?
Yes, I think I just thought it would probably make sense to allow people that are actually in Poland to have a very interesting view about this, rather than me trying to apply some sort of, global aspect into everything. And it's quite refreshing also to hear what, Margaret, James, and Tonia has actually said about this. I think what is particularly interesting for me as a scholar of race who looks at Poland from outside Poland, is the fact that there's not enough work done about this within academia to start with. It's quite often wrongly assumed that people don't read or people don't write about race and racialization in Poland. People write about them, people talk about them, but they're actually done within anthropology, biology, and genetics. This discussion is not actually moving from that area where it's actually eating into sociology that is actually close to the society. So I think this is one of the problems where we don't have enough publication about it in academia, where actually people actually discussing this thing. This issue regarding the M word, it's quite refreshing that in most countries in the West, this is a conversation that they've actually had about 60, 70 years ago, and they've actually moved on. I think the problem, what we are seeing now in Poland, is like that word is actually stuck in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. It's a discussion for 100 years ago that we are trying to have today. And for me to have a better understanding of it, we need to have a look at the trajectory of that word. It's not exactly, for me, Polish. It's a trajectory. We need to look at the Eurocentric aspect of it, the way it's actually traveled from Europe. You look at actually Western Europe, you look at England, you look at Spain, you look at actually Germany before you actually get into Europe. What has this particular name, what has it served? What does it mean? What purposes, in which way has this person been characterized? And then when it got into Poland, it's not possible when it got into Poland and it suddenly becomes neutral. Even if it becomes neutral, you cannot delete the long existing history that this process is actually taking place. So we need to look at this. And also, within academia, I don't think that if we've actually had, you know, I've always said to most of my colleagues in the UK that for me, I think Poland should be the place where we look at to get a lot of knowledge about race and racism, because a lot of things actually happen in Poland. But we often look at America, you know, it's because there's been no much work done within this area in academia. I think this, if we've actually had so much work, people's actually talking about it, I think there will have been a bit of progress. Having said that, I think this is a very, very unique situation. This actually allows us, it gives us a very good opportunity to now progress the argument, to now progress the discussion. And actually, I particularly welcome, I would really love to see now Polish academics. You know, I'm really tired of actually having to rely on the work that's actually done in the UK and America to explain the situation in Poland. I want Polish academics to start, especially in sociology, to start discussing and writing about this so that we can bring this experience, the very, very original Polish experience, into a very global context.
Thank you very much, Bolaji. Very important point. That's what we are doing. Margaret and Tonia.
Yes, can I just shortly, one thing?
Because, Tonia and Margaret. Okay.
Yeah, Bolaji mentioned that this Eurocentric need of naming someone this word like Murzyn this means nothing. Like for me, Murzyn is like just a special word to name that someone is black. And the last question, the part of question is really interesting to me. It's from Paulina. In Polish, afroamerykańskie sounds good, while czarne sounds a bit weird. And this is a bit weird to me as a considering black person, because every black person in Poland I know treats word black or czarne as totally neutral, like the whole world. When the white Polish people are like, czarne is negative. I don't know if black people would like to be named czarny. So this is really interesting to me that white Polish people had this problem with naming someone by their color. Like when I ask someone, what is your color? He would say, I'm white, and it's totally neutral. But when Polish person had to say that someone is black, he's like, I don't know if it's offensive. And this is something really interesting to me. And just like, I wanted to address it real quick. So Margaret, to you.
No, thank you. Just because you mentioned this black and czarne, so from linguistic point of view, and also from, when I say in linguistic, it's not only about language, but about the meanings that are embedded in our minds. So in Polish culture and Polish language, I very often encounter this response that why czarne? Czarne has a very negative connotations, because this is true. Historically, czarne, the black color, in a very Christianic kind of, worldview, was seen as a very dark, metaphorically as well, not just a very negative connotation of evil. So that's why in Polish, especially in Polish academia, linguists, they are against this word. They say that Polish is that czarne is a symbol of something which is negative. So, but just shifting into something, and I want to just quickly synthesize and tackle upon what James said and Bolaji and also Tonia. So shifting to this pragmatics, what James mentioned, from semantics to pragmatics is exactly what the critical thinking is about, and the critical use of words, the critical behavior, whatever, in life. It's about just paying attention to the addressee of certain words, of certain actions, and so on and so forth, and not so much to your intention, as James said, that it's not your intention. And it's established in the academia, in communication studies, well established speech act theories. We don't look at illocutionary act anymore. We look at perlocutionary acts. So perlocutionary acts are those which are the effects of the words, right? So the effect of the word in the brain of the addressee, of the receiver, is being researched and being looked at, and not the intention of the speaker, of the person who is saying certain words. So I completely agree that this shift also in Polish, the academia of linguists, of discourse analysts, is very, very crucial. And I also agree with Bolaji that the debate about race, the research, the literature on race and racism is very scarce in Poland, and it needs to expand. And just from my experience, when I was a PhD student, I kept being discouraged to conduct my research, and therefore I moved to, I looked for scholarships, fellowships. I studied in the Netherlands, in the UK, in the US, because I knew people in academia would understand me, and that I could, you know, use their knowledge. I could bring the knowledge. I didn't think at that time that I would be going back to Poland, but I did eventually, and I live here, and it's okay now. But when I defended my doctorate, I still was being seen as someone who is bringing in this subjective eye, the subjective perspective into the academic work, which for traditional structuralist Polish linguists that only look at words at the surface level. They don't look at these underlying power dynamics, underlying cognitive, maybe cognitive, yes, but not, they don't look deeper what's at the bottom of this iceberg. They only want to see what's in the system of language, and that's why we are still stuck on the word Murzyn. That's why, James, you are tired. I'm tired too, because it's been going on for decades. For me, maybe for more than 10 years. But I've seen it going on for many years, explaining to people why Murzynek Bambo is unacceptable, why the word Murzyn should not be present in the public debate. And also I keep explaining to people why this critical understanding of language, which goes beyond linguistic debate, is so crucial and significant. So looking at power relations, institutional relations also, this is something, because, you know, I didn't get a position at university because I was doing some irrelevant research. And I got discouraged. I said, okay, I want to move to something else. I remember Bolaji and I talked 2-3 years ago for the first time. And I told him, I'm fed up. I don't want to go there because nobody wants to listen and discuss, because I am seen as someone unreliable, biased, as someone who is bringing different contexts from the US, and it's different here because Poland is a homogeneous country and there is no racism. So still this going on, this debate, this denial, this you know, the rhetoric of denial and so on and so forth. And this is a very emotional thing. And thank you for bringing this up, even though I'm an adult and I live, and it's okay, you know, but still this is a very rarely brought up topic. I don't speak about it very often. I don't have opportunity to talk about it because I need to keep silent in order to be heard.
Would you just apropos this, would you consider Margaret, James, Tonia, would you consider the biggest success in this redefinition of the blackness in Poland and the general linguistic and in other spheres of life, let's say re-evaluation in a way of blackness and the general where we are now and in comparison where we were 10 years ago when it comes to the question of racism in Poland, in discursive sphere and non-discursive spheres? Would you consider the biggest, let's say, gains, and also what you see as the biggest obstacles and the biggest challenges for the, let's say, years ahead? James, maybe starting from you now.
I think I'll say the biggest problem. I think it has to be with consultation. We are not consulted in any level. They don't understand. There's no discussion actually with those who bear the brand of these terminologies. So if there could be, and again, as Ali mentioned, if there could be platforms, even within academia, to actually redefine these terminologies, understand why. Black could be controversial in a way, depending on the trajectory. If you look at it from the color perspective, of course it is. If you look at it as a social construct of race, we have to address those issues, or a political preference. So having this kind of discussion on actually understanding the context in which it is used, and in my perspective, Blackness is something that actually shapes my life. So I have to talk about it. I have to mention it because it's actually a race, and all the social realities comes within this terminology. So we need to actually understand the implication or the application of this terminology against other insidious ways, even more egregious ways of subjugating somebody by just using one terminology. So if you look comparatively, if you look at the word nigger or negro, the way it was used in the US context and how it ended up being banned, and in some states actually is illegal to use, it's been criminalized. That it was a mandate for murder is a word that KKK used to hang Black people. So that in that context, you can understand why it's no longer used and it's very derogatory. There's some will say, but I hear Black people using the same, they call their friends my nigger, or something like that. There's a different context and the subject of different discussion, because some of them use it as a form of endearment, some use it as something that was used to subjugate them. Now they want to turn it to a more positive way. Some also say, I don't want to listen to that word. There's been this sort of discussions in the US for many years, and we've seen, as Bolaji mentioned, it's been very progressive in terms of the applications. In Poland, there's no kind of that discursive platform where even in the academia, they, some of them just do desktop research and then they come with this hypothesis and stuff like that are very irrelevant, not consistent with the contemporary realities. I think we should have a more constructive platform where everybody is included and we could address these issues and actually look at what the next step, other than using some sort of subjective ways of validating the application of the terms, of terminologies rather.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, obviously, of addressing the question of race and racism in Poland, which is there, is and mentioned also by Margaret, is the fact that Poland is a fairly homogeneous society, and this is something that obviously doesn't help. But at the same time, as we see, this is a increasingly diverse society. So as we've shown in some reports with Bolaji, just people who have legal residency and have African citizenships over 2,000, and this number is growing. And one of the interesting groups that has been growing very rapidly in the last years are students, African students who are coming with an Erasmus framework, which has been opened to some of the African countries. So this is something that is clearly there. And obviously, and your activism, for example, Tonia's or James, the fact that you are institutionalizing, and there was also a question in the chat from someone who asked you about some recommendations to set up an association. I believe it was Olivia. This is probably, I wonder whether you also think that this is a way forward. The more of these associations are there, the more projects they do in their localities, in Gdańsk, in Lublin, in Warsaw. This will eventually, in the years to come, bring up some results also in the form of passing through the discussions about, for example, Murzynek Bambo, yeah, and others. What do you think, Tonia, Margaret?
I think that the more organizations, NGOs, and etc., then the better, because we need to be heard. Often, when I'm talking with my Polish friends, they don't see the problem of racism. They think this is the myth. It's not existing in Poland because here we don't have black people. So this is this kind of thinking. But the more of more organizations, then people will see organization of parents of mixed race children, when I saw somewhere here in the chat, or the organization Stowarzyszenie Polaków Pochodzenia Afrykańskiego, which I am the member of. We have to show people that the problem is real and we have our voice. We don't need anybody else to speak about us and to speak for us. And that we have feelings, you know, because a lot of times when I am writing something about racism on my Facebook page, I got negative comments that right now it's like the reverse racism towards white men, so shut up, you don't know nothing. I got bigger problems than stupid word Murzyn, and etc., etc. So, like, I think that people need to know that they are not talking about something like abstract, but they talking about the real people who are living in Poland, and they can read it, they can feel the pain. And you know, I just think that Margaret said about it earlier, that really important is to know that when I am talking about the problem, it's not, I'm not attacking you. Like, I am not attacking white Poles, I'm just talking about my problem. Because lots of times I hear that, yeah, we have problems too. So no, this is not the answer. Like, just hear me out for once. So I think this is the biggest problem right now, to make people feel more empathy, and just to listen, because we know what we have to do. So just listen. This is what I think about it right now.
Margaret?
Yeah, I'm going to be short. So a very old-fashioned answer to your question about the challenges and what should be done. education on systematic level, intercultural education, diversity and inclusion, because many situations and misunderstandings between people, they just come from lack of knowledge, and the cultural knowledge sometimes, or the diversity, the lack of diversity acceptance that, you know, we can all just be different, and that's okay. The first thing is that what I said at the end of my presentation, so listening without just understanding, empathic understanding without judging or just waiting for my response to happen, reply to happen. And the third thing is to stand up and not stand by, even if it doesn't, even if it doesn't really, if it affect me as a white person. I also have a responsibility to stand up against racism, and especially now. James said that tomorrow, day after tomorrow, next month, in 2 months, everybody will forget again about racism, because now everyone is speaking about racism. It's the same debate that it had been 10 years ago, but now it's amplified by Black voices as well. And I think this is a milestone. Because this debate today, this panel, is also a sign of gain, you know, because I told you before our meeting, before our panel, the seminar, that I had never participated in such seminar, which would be titled Race, Understanding Race and Racism in Poland. Before it was maybe ethnicity sometimes, or some multicultural debate or something like that, but not race and racism. So I think this is a great gain that we are doing it, and I hope that participants also will hear us out, and as Tonia also shouted, and that's it will go further, that people will take it with them, and that you will just not stand by us, but you will stand up for us, not because we are victim, it's because you have a responsibility not to be complicit in this racist system, not only in Poland, because we are all global people, right? We can tell we are talking now globally, and we are communicating globally. It's not just Poland and we in Poland. And I think that's about it. I don't want to say much more.
Absolutely, and one of the important dimensions that is linked with this discussion is obviously this dimension of racialization of different types of groups. So obviously, we are today talking about color races, but all of this discussion, I've been doing a lot of research, as you probably know some of it, on religious racializations, in particular relating to people of different faiths, in particular Muslims, and now we see a big attempts to racialize also LGBTQ community. So, and other communities are there. So in a way, having this discussion, it is vital for us to kind of to prepare our immune system. In the time of pandemic, immune system is an important word probably, but to prepare, and James said it, that it's kind of a pandemic of racism, to prepare us in a way for this various types of anti-other mobilizations, whoever the others are. And the more work will be done on color-based racism, on religious-based racism, or other types of racism, the more gains for the whole society that this moral panics raised by populist politicians will in a way save us, especially in the times where there will be, hopefully not, but if there is a growing unemployment rates and growing economic problems where the scapegoating sort of mechanism will start emerging in a growing extent. So do you have any other things that you would like to say? The last words, Bolaji or James or Tonia? If yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
I have, okay, Bolaji, go. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for that, James. Right, I think it's very, very important. Just one thing I want people to bear in mind, just as a kind of takeaway message, and in order to simplify everything, is to think about, I think quite often people always talk about racism, and people seem to think that they have an idea what it means. From my understanding of many of these things, about probably 80% of the society doesn't understand what that race or racism means. One way to help us to think about this thing is just for now, suspend the idea of racism and think about the emergence of the word race. What does it mean? Individuals who are actually interested should start looking about race. How has the word race emerged? How has people been described from centuries? How have the word actually moved from 19th century up to where we are today? How have people been divided into groups and in which they're actually put into hierarchy, and certain people are actually seen right at the top and some people are actually seen at the bottom? I think thinking about race, the way it's been constructed from the sort of kind of, biological aspect of it as well, we maybe perhaps help people to understand, to rethink the understanding of racism. When people actually react in a very racist way, then we know that this is actually coming from the categorization of people and the way certain people has actually been seen. Also, people need to, perhaps maybe this has not happened a lot in Poland, but we've seen it quite a lot in the UK during COVID-19 pandemic. The way the idea of biological race is being brought into this, again, people need to start thinking about it. How is it possible? It's a very, very reductionist argument, a very, very, simplistic argument to say because somebody is Black, therefore they're going to die of coronavirus. It's not that. It's not the idea of biology, it's the idea of inequality. I think if people can start thinking about in this way, perhaps it will help us to have a better, race is a very, very complicated idea, and racism as well. And I think part of our job is to try and make it very clear for people. I think it's only when people can understand what they are dealing with, they'll be able to actually move and think around it the way it actually works. In terms of in Poland, I think it's a very, very unique situation in Poland, but at the same time, we need to think globally. Poland is part of a global organization. So for example, European Union. Poland took part in so many things in so many unique ways. In the same way, Poland cannot detach itself from the idea of modernity. And as far as that idea of modernity is there, race is pandemic to modernity. I think it's when we start thinking about this in a very global way in which individuals actually connected, perhaps it will help us to maybe understand what's actually going on here.
Thanks a lot, Bolaji, for this very important point. James, last words?
Yeah, my point, I think we're looking at racism and its manifestation. I mean, the fight is a long fight, and there's so many forces we have to deal with here. There are, the far-right mushrooming groups in Europe and in Poland as well that actually even make it much harder to actually create more awareness and educational sort of activities. But I think also there's a, as they say, the still waters runs deep. They are the so-called liberals who actually are perpetuating this system by, open person and tolerance. So there's no point of, having a discussion on this. I'm more exposed. I have friends from all over, as Margaret said initially during the presentation, that I have these friends, I have friends all over, so I can't be racist. And sometimes it's really hard to tell somebody that just standing and not doing nothing when somebody is being targeted by probably racial slurs or something of that sort, of that nature, and you're just quiet, you're as well racist, because you're sort of perpetuating the incident or the activity of the, that system. So, and people need to understand the implications and their role in actually fighting this part. And also in Poland, I think the focus is more on interpersonal and also on microaggressions, something like that. But we don't talk much about structural, institutional racism, which actually is even more insidious because it controls you, it controls your pocket, controls your income, it controls your health, it controls every aspect of your life. And it's not that much in the discourse. So I think we should start talking about these issues, and having more African organizations could be very instrumental in terms of lobbying, having a more formidable group, having one voice and talking about this issue at even legislative level, at the higher higher institutions. And because change always, is bottom up or top bottom, you never know. And I think we need to start this kind of conversation. We spread it to the universities, to the academia, to primary school, secondary school, and make sure that everyone actually is part and parcel of this change if they are willing. As Mandela said, to paraphrase, that nobody's born to hate, but they learn to hate. So if they can learn to hate, then they can actually learn to love. And that's where education comes in.
Minuta jeszcze.
Thank you very much, James, for this. Tonia, the last sentence is for you as well.
Yeah, it will be short because I have to go. First of all, I wanted to thank you, every one of you who participated in this debate, because I think it's really important that we met today. For me, it's like the first debate of this kind in my life. So this is the good sign then that in Poland we started to think about racism in another way, and maybe through hard work we can change something. And this is my last words for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tonia. It's a very good conclusion and a very good wrap up. That was also my. You stole my last words. Obviously, huge thanks to all of you for taking your time to present your work, and all the persons. It's still over almost 40 people who are still with us. So big thanks to all the participants and guests for being with us so long and taking so much time. We could probably discuss these issues a little bit even longer, but we need to end now. Many thanks. We will, as said earlier, we'll make a video out of it, and which will be available on YouTube, and hopefully we'll organize soon again a discussion. We will present some of our research and your research, and discuss these issues further, because I believe there are still a lot of issues that we've just touched upon, and we haven't really had time to delve into some of the big issues. But thanks for today. Have a good evening, and keep in touch with us and follow us on our website, on Facebook, and YouTube channel. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And big thanks to my friend Jan Brzozowski for moderating technically this and muting everybody and allowing this very smooth transmission and communication. Big thanks to Jan. Thanks, Jan.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.